Let's get perspective on all of this from the former U.S. ambassador to Canada, Bruce Heyman, and also the author of The Art of Diplomacy. How important is that today? And also a former partner for over 30 years at Goldman Sachs. Ambassador, welcome. Thank you. And so nice to be able to speak with you. There's a lot to cover right now.
Good to be back with you.
Thank you. Ambassador, I'd first like to get your take from what we heard from President-elect, Democratic-elect Joe Biden and the view that if elected, he would cancel Keystone XL. I have a hard time saying that, I'm sorry, but what's your view and your reaction to that news?
So just to remind everybody that I was the ambassador working with both the Harper government and the Trudeau government during the decision process on Keystone. And at that time, it was handed over to the State Department to make a determination whether this was in the national interest of the United States. And the State Department under John Kerry made the determination that it was not in the U.S. interest for three reasons. First, it didn't create substantive new jobs in the United States. Second, it didn't lower gasoline prices in any meaningful way. And third, maybe most importantly, it was contrary to the beliefs of the administration on dealing with climate change, especially as we were moving into the Paris Agreement. And promoting this kind of project was contrary to that climate policy of the administration. When that announcement was made in early November 2015, the president made the announcement, and standing right with him was the vice president and the Secretary of State. That vice president was Joe Biden. And I worked directly with Joe Biden. He swore me in. We traveled the country together in Canada, in Ottawa, in Vancouver. I worked closely with him. He believes in the policy of dealing with climate change. And he is just reiterating a longstanding belief that he had from the prior administration. This is nothing new. This is just an articulation of the policies that he's going to bring forward when he's president.
At the same time, though, Ambassador, given where we stand in the economy, and let's switch to that conversation right now. I want to get your take on that. But is this really the time to potentially limit jobs, energy jobs, oil jobs in the United States as well as in Canada? And also, just given the geopolitics, is it really the time for the United States to not take Canadian oil and instead have to import it from Saudi Arabia as well as Venezuela? Does that make sense to you, or is this just something that we're going to hear on a campaign platform and we don't need to worry or think about the economic and political consequences?
Oh, you should think about all of these things. But today, as you and I are talking, the world is awash with oil. Our storage capacity is about full in the United States. We don't need any more oil, and we're trying to find ways to shut oil in, even in the United States and around the world. Our number one place that we buy most of our oil from is Canada. Outside of the United States is number one. In fact, we buy more oil from Canada than the next 5 countries combined, all of them combined. And so Canada is a big supplier. But I think the next administration can be focusing on how we use less oil on a going forward basis, increasing those mileage standards in cars, improving efficiency on other transportation like aircraft, et cetera, and trying to enhance our use of solar and wind and other environmentally positive sources of energy.
Is it almost premature, though, to really get into those details right now, Ambassador, given what is going on in the economy? And what is your take in terms of truly where we stand? Because, you know, you were at Goldman Sachs for over 30 years. You know the markets. Yeah. These markets are rebounding. Yeah. Seems to be a real disconnect. What's your view, first and foremost, on what you're seeing in the U.S. economy? And then we'll dovetail it into the markets.
So you know me. I don't pull punches or hedge things too much. I try to say it exactly as it is. So let's just be blunt with everybody. We are in a depression. We have lost 36 million jobs. Real GDP is going to decline something on the order of 25%, 30%, could be even higher than that. And when you have those kinds of numbers, those numbers are depression-esque numbers. That's a depression. The question is, how long are we going to be there? Is this a temporary stop for just a quarter or 2 or 3, and then we're going to bounce right back out of it? Or is it going to be a longer, more difficult slog? I would say, listening to the chairman of the Fed, he seemed very concerned and was looking for more stimulus from Congress. He seemed very concerned about the path ahead. I would tell you that in all my experience in business, businesses are fast to fire and slow to hire. And I think although 80% of all of these people laid off think they're coming back to work right away and it's just a furlough, I'm skeptical of that. And I'm concerned that this is going to have a longer lasting impact on the economy with bankruptcies, with mortgage challenges, and then also this disconnect between the wealthy and those that don't have a significant amount of assets or wealth. That gap was already wide. I think going through the experience we've just done the last 2 months has widened that further, which is going to create a greater schism in the United States.
And we saw that take place during the financial crisis of 2008, 2009 in terms of quick to fire, but very, very slow to rehire. I feel, as we look at these government programs, Ambassador, that the governments are very cognizant of that. So I have to believe to a degree that they are aware, and they want to make sure that these programs do bridge that gap. So what do you think of the programs in the United States as well as in Canada? Is it enough to bridge the gap? And if not, what more could they be doing?
So I think that the programs that the Congress, and I give them good marks on this so far, although we're going to hear about people who shouldn't have gotten the money, got the money, and people who should have that didn't. But in general, I give them good marks for fast action. I give the Fed great marks for very fast and broad action, hitting this and realizing the tsunami of what it was on the economy. But I think everything to date has been done to stabilize where we are. Now we're going to need actual real stimulus programs after we come out of this. Infrastructure programs, putting people back to work. There are going to be millions and millions of people that will not be going back to work. And we've got to figure out as a country, and I would say in the world, we've got to figure out what to do with them. Some hardline industries, which used a lot of employees, have now been displaced with technology, and they're not going back to the jobs that they had. And so we're going to have to figure out what to do with these people, which we're going to have a natural evolution. It's happened overnight, and we're going to have to figure out what to do with that.
Quick question here with respect to some of the programs. We had details, more details announced today in terms of our federal government giving larger loans to larger companies, but with some strings attached if you're a publicly traded company specifically, perhaps restricting dividends, restricting share repurchase, maybe the government taking an ownership position. How is that going to work with Board of Governors in terms of whether or not they'd even be willing to accept that? If you're a publicly traded company, what would your thoughts be there?
So look, and I don't know all the details, only saw the headlines, and I don't, purport myself to be an expert in those details that are actually taking place in Canada. But let me say the following. Over this last decade, the largest single purchaser of U.S. stocks was the companies buying their own stock back, corporate repurchase programs. They did that not only with the money that they used from the tax cut from what Trump gave them, but they also leveraged their balance sheet. Then, lo and behold, we find ourselves now that they don't have the cash on hand, nor do they have the lines of credit to sustain themselves even for a few months in a shutdown. So I think if they're going to get government money, there should be kind of, hey, quid pro quo here. We're going to give you government money, but I want to make sure you're using that money to stay in business, to keep people working, and to not take that money and then plow it out as dividends or do corporate repurchase programs. And there has to be just a partnership here in understanding that the government, taxpayer money, is going to come in and help you out. So you're going to have to do the things that sustain your business in an appropriate way. I think that's fair. And corporations can make the decision that they want the money or don't want the money. And if they take the money, then I think it has to have those strings attached.
Understood. Ambassador, great to be able to speak with you today. So much more to discuss. So thank you, though, for your time today. That is
Anytime.
Former U.S. Thank you. That is former U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Bruce Heyman.